Welcome, and as you know, we've been running a series in the last 4 or 5 months on the English novel, and that was concluded last month. And this month we thought that we should give a kind of idea of what we understand by the general aspects of life, and 4 lectures were arranged to fulfill this condition, to fulfill this wish. So today is the last lecture. So far we have covered social science, we have covered ideology, we have covered history, and today all those combined into what we call life will be covered. So for this lecture we have Professor Payal Nagpal with us. She teaches English in JDM Delhi University, and since she became professor of late recently, so first I start with congratulating her. Payal, congratulations to you.
Thank
you. The topic that Professor Payal Nagpal will deal with is literature and life. And before I request her to begin her comment, begin her explanation and elucidation, let me say a few things and share with you my perspective on this particular topic. It's a very simple topic apparently, but if you come closer to it, if you start talking about it, if you start considering the various aspects which are hidden behind it, then you would realize, and I realized while doing so, that it's a very subtle and a very complex topic. Because what does one mean by life? Life can be social life, it can be economic life, it can be emotional life, it can be aesthetic life, and it can be many other things. As I said, the previous 3 lectures were combined today into what can be called life. So I would expect that we viewers go into this aspect a bit subtly, a bit deeply, and with the nuance in mind, and what literature and life signify. And so far as I am concerned, I think that literature is general. Literature is something that covers the totality of life. But life gives problems to literature. Life is controlled by certain forces. Life is controlled by certain structures, and most of us don't enjoy it because it's not in our control to enjoy. It's not in our control to create and condition life, and therefore, as citizens, we find it difficult to make sense of it. So these aspects will be covered by Professor Payal Nagpal. So I would request her now to tell us in the beginning itself as to what one could mean by life as such.
Thank you, Professor Prakash, and thank you for your wishes. I agree with you that when we discuss, we are in a sense both in the realm of literature and life, and I think it's a very good opportunity today for us to discuss what, really speaking, are the connections between literature and life. Do they relate to each other? Can literature be situated within the realm of what we call life? And you very correctly posed the question about what does it really mean? So when we look at things around us, I think we are situated at a specific moment in history. We are never outside of this. So in this kind of a context, when we place ourselves in a specific context, I think we also need to understand, as you yourself said, that the problems are presented in a sense by life, and these are then taken up by writers, by thinkers, and are given a kind of creative form in the realm of literature. So it's not a very deterministic, simplistic reflection of life, but to the problems that life poses or to the situations that life poses, it's important that the writer uses her or his creativity to understand these problems and to present them in a certain way. Mm-hmm. And I think the writer's creativity is something that kind of draws us then into the realm of literature.
In my lecture earlier, I quoted Matthew Arnold, mm-hmm. and he defined life as life in itself. It really is. But when you're a writer, you're a poet, and you don't think of life as it really is, but you think of life as you think about it, as you make of it,
yes.
as it appeals to you. So there is a kind of difficulty in understanding life in its purity, in its totality, in its essence. But what do you think?
I think when Arnold says life as it is, this idea of life as it is, I think, firstly, actually, in a very different way, is posed by the realist writers and the novelists of the early 19th century. In fact, they have put this into practice, but I think the way they have put it into practice is very different from the Arnoldian understanding of life as it is, because I think when we see life as it is, we've given the answer in this very statement, which is observation. So the observant eye is the eye of the writer, and it's what the writer is seeing around her, around him, and that is what is being captured. And of course, there's a massive shift in the understanding of literature, for instance, from the 19th century to, where this observation, this power of observation takes into consideration, is cognizant of changes in the field of science and in the field of the social transformations that are taking place. And all these find their way through the observant eye of the writer into the novel that he writes.
That's a beautiful word, observant eye. So what exactly is meant by the observant eye? The observant eye means discriminating, separating the real from the unreal, the right from the wrong, the plain from the complex. What is the observant eye? I'm struck by this phrase, and I like this phrase, because writers have the observant eye.
I would, at the cost of appearing slightly conservative, I would still go along with the early, with maybe a Balzacian or maybe a Gogolian understanding of the observant eye, which would be to show things as they are, and to actually maybe to go back to Chaucer, really speaking, who does it, where you see the people around you, where you see situations around you, and you present them without actually judging them morally. And without actually, presenting the different aspects, the different facets of society, of human beings, of human society, lived society.
Tell us about how Gogol looked at his world in the 19th century. Because you referred to him, and he is an important writer, and he is a writer that we would generally not come across, because he comes from Russia, and he is far back in time. He is 19th century. Tell us something about Gogol and his view of life.
So, actually, with Gogol and he's written novels like Dead Souls and a very famous short story called The Overcoat, and it's famously said that it's as if all of realism came from from underneath Gogol's overcoat, because that is a story that really changed everything. So when we move, in a sense, from the way in which Pushkin writes to the way in which Gogol writes, there's a marked difference, and the difference is in terms of this idea of the author having the observant eye, where Gogol presents, for instance, if I take a novel like Dead Souls, in the first part, he presents the landowning class, and there are all sorts of people. Some are presented, there might be something good about them, and most are shown in a sense, it's avarice, greed of some sort. So he presents the characters as they are, as they probably emerge from real life in Russia, the landowning class. But he does not impose a moral rubric on them. And it's interesting, one of the criticisms then can be that is the novel the Gogolian novel, a very anarchic sort of a novel? No, it's not, because in presenting things as they are, I think a writer like Gogol also asks the reader to pitch herself or himself, to understand, where do you belong and where do you stand? How do you absorb these aspects of society, and what do you think about it?
Does Gogol talk about life directly, or does he shows us the life that is around him through characters?
Both. He shows us life through characters, and he shows us life through nature, landscape. I think if anybody wants to read about what Russia looked like in the 19th century, they just need to pick up a novel like Dead Souls, and the vast stretches of land, how Chichikov is moving from one part to the other, the kind of vehicle in which he is traveling, the kind of people he meets, I think it's all there.
The human behavior. How does he watch human behavior in the 19th century?
So at times it's like he's creating caricatures of people, and then of course he kind of tones it down and he starts looking at them in terms of, let's say, the work they do. But it's almost everything from the morphology to the anatomy, in the sense that their physical structure and their mental makeup and the way their behavioral pattern, their dealings with other people, the way in which they treat the people who are working for them, the peasants, the serfs. So all these are kind of outlined
and
by
all
Gogol.
These characters belong to the 19th century Russia.
Yes.
And they are different from the 18th century Russia and the 20th century Russia.
Yes, certainly.
So that uniqueness about the 19th century is shown through the life that he saw, observed, to use your word, with his observant eye. That's how he picked up those things from the 19th century. So in a way, 19th century is, as an idea, is ingrained in these characters, because you also talk of mental makeup.
Yes.
So tell us something about his use of the mental makeup in order to evoke the Russian reality.
So when we use the phrase mental makeup, it is going to be very different from the way the mental makeup is understood, let's say, in the post-Arnoldian world. In the 20th century, the way Woolf or Joyce, the way they imagine individual subjectivity is not the way Gogol is looking at individual subjectivity. And there are many reasons for this. I think one of the prime reasons we need to keep in mind is that the novel as a genre is not very old. And it begins only in the 18th century. So, and in the context of Russia, it kind of blooms into something very beautiful in the hands of writers like Gogol and later Turgenev and so on. So, having said that, their mental makeup in the sense of what their thought processes, but it's more their engagement with human society that Gogol concentrates on, rather than to move tangentially or to move laterally into the individual's thought processes. That their mental makeup is also reflected in a sense in terms of their dealings with other people.
So the thought processes, the mental makeup, the reactions and responses that are generated by the life in the 19th century, they are picked up intelligently and consciously by the author.
Very consciously, and it requires tremendous observation. There is no doubt about that. That the way in which Gogol has looked at things around him and has made them creatively a part of the novel and fictionalized it, which brings us to a very important question about the relationship between literature and life. So it's also a relationship between kind of reality, fiction, imagination, fantasy. All these elements are strung together, as it were, in the domain of literature.
Some people in literature talk a great deal about and stress the effect of nature. The nature, away from human beings, nature, in the sky, on the earth, in air, in water, in the seas, etc. So, what importance does life give to nature? There is something that is there in nature which separates perhaps life from the writer from the social life itself. As is the case with romantics. Romantics would not talk about the urban reality. They would talk about the villagers, they would talk about the simple people. So what is the role of nature vis-a-vis life in literature?
So when we look at the role of nature, I think we need to understand nature in many different ways. It's a very loaded word, because on the one hand is nature as it exists, the physical aspects of looking at, like you said, the sky, maybe the trees around and so on. And then there is human nature. And the engagement that we see in literature and the engagement that we see in life is an engagement between these two, which is interpersonal relations, human nature, and the way in which all this is related to the larger understanding, a more universal definition in a sense of nature. today when we talk about many different aspects, from climate change to other ways to ecology, in a sense, there are we also need to understand that human beings are impacting this so-called universal concept of nature in a very big way. So but that, of course, today in a very, very developed sense, but back in the day it was a very different understanding. So it's nature the way it is, and then nature, like you pointed out with the Romantics, it's also a way of resisting the urban reality, the industrialization, the mapping the changes, for instance, in industrial towns. So the Romantic poets decided to resist that completely by restricting themselves, in a sense, to the domain of nature, where they saw beauty and where they expressed the aesthetics of their writing in terms of the beauty of nature.
Which means that you are not accusing Romantics of being illusory or escapists. You think that through their supposed escape, they in fact are commenting on the sordid scene of life that they confront.
Well, there is this view, as you pointed out, that Romantics are seen as escapists, but I think it's important to situate the Romantic poets in the time period in which they are writing. I think post the French Revolution and the kind of excitement that it generated about change world over, I think they need to be looked at from that perspective. And then again, each of the individual Romantic poets, I think there is a certain change. For instance, the way the early Wordsworth is writing is not the way that Wordsworth is writing later in the day, and is very different from the way, let's say, Shelley and Byron are writing, or the Keatsian idea of looking at nature. So nature then is being understood in very different ways, is being filtered through the mental makeup, through the observant eye of these poets. So particular, all these questions are so very relevant because in a discussion on literature and life, I mean, we finished this particular course on the English novel. So the generic considerations, the transformations, not just in the novel form, but literature at large, that we have mapped, are very, very important. And this is why I think today's presentation is titled Literature and Life. So I would now like to pose a question to the viewers and to you, sir, that for instance, it's often said that literature holds a mirror to reality. So what kind of a relationship do we have between literature and reality? Is it a mechanical sort of a relationship where literature is supposed to mindlessly reflect what the writer sees, or is literature a kind of vehicle through which reality is to be understood? The answers might not always be found, but can the questions at least be posed, and which then brings us to the larger question of is literature then shaped by reality itself, and is there potential in literature to possibly, if at all, to locate answers that help us redefine the contours of life itself? What are your views on this?
Actually, there is inherent in your discussion the presence of these points, and it's a very, very important thing, that finally it will lead us to what role a writer plays in society, and how he or she reacts to the challenges in society. And in fact, we can straight away connect this point that you raised so importantly with Romantics themselves.
Yes.
Some people call them escapists, but see the irony. Wordsworth is very close to and sympathetic with the French Revolution.
Yes.
So if he's talking only about nature, he is also only talking about human nature. How come that he in fact participates in the French Revolution as a citizen? He goes there, he's excited by it, and that he wants to change society. So if somebody wants to change society, wants to contribute to the what is called revolutionary spirit, then his idea comes to mind, Blake's idea comes to mind, who is another Romantic poet, Byron's idea comes to mind, who talks about freedom and who is for the lower classes in England in his poetry, And Shelley, of course, is a socialist poet. So on one side we have poets like romantics being told that they are cutting themselves off from reality. In their behavior, these writers show that they are in fact adding to the verve and the dynamism of life by telling people that life is not merely that which you confront, but as you rightly said, that life has some potentiality to realize itself, and literature does that. So literature, I think I agree with you that literature plays a role. Literature identifies certain areas in life and tries to emphasize them so that people start thinking along lines of change. So this is my view.
Yes, I agree. And since we've been discussing the Russian novel and the ideas actually in the Russian novel, so I have here with me a quotation by Marx and Engels. It's a letter written by Engels to Minakotsky, where he says, "The modern Russians and the Norwegians who produce excellent novels all write with a purpose. I think, however, that the purpose must become manifest from the situation and the action themselves without being expressly pointed out, and that the author does not have to serve the reader on a platter the future historical resolution of the social conflicts which he describes." So this is Engels' view, and this raises, I think, the fundamental question of does literature have a purpose, and is literature something that is meant only for a kind of outpouring of the heart, or just for the sake of claiming to be a writer? And with the establishment of the publishing industry, this is a point that's of course been taken up by critics as well. So what really speaking, when we look at the connections between literature and life, I think the site on which we really look at these connections, it's mediated by the writer, and the writer is a very important element here, only to the point of writing, and of course we take it on from there, and then we also bring in the reader. But the fundamental connection between literature and life also raises the fundamental question of what really speaking is the purpose of literature, and if there is a purpose, then is it the job of the author to really speaking reflect on and show every possible aspect of the society? And is the author, as Engels says, that he says a writer does not have to serve the reader on a platter the future historical resolution. So we need to think about the idea of purpose and the way it's taken up by the writers themselves. So
Engels' quotation, I think, is very interesting in the sense that he talks about the committed writer, but the committed writer is one who is drawing in the reader into the reading, and in fact disappears from it from the scene directly. He wants to make his readers feel the presence and the emphasis that society and life present to him or her. And in fact, for Engels and for his associates, hiding was showing. This is what he said, and in this quotation that also is clear that he should not present his own point of view directly. He should present situations in such a manner that there is a kind of dramatic aspect about them. The readers think the problems posed in literature are their problems and that they have to solve them. So a kind of activation, a kind of change occurs in the very perception of the reader. The reader starts equating himself or herself with the circumstance that is presented in the author, in the authorial practice of writing. So I believe that that kind of life which is dramatic, that kind of life which contains tension in it, that kind of life which problematizes things in such a manner that the reader starts thinking, he or she is compelled to think, that literature actually is very close to the spirit of life, the spirit of assertion, the spirit of enthusiasm, the spirit of celebration, whatever you may call it. But writing has to be all the time close to that subtle aspect of life which general people can see it only with the help from the writer and literature, otherwise they can't see. So observant eye is really important.
And it's interesting that in writing of this kind that we've just been discussing, and which is where this quotation also fits in very well, is that I think somewhere the writer also allows the reader to navigate herself or himself through these observations and to decide, for herself as to where she or he wants to kind of pitch themselves in a reading, in an understanding of the piece of literature.
So friends, in this discussion, Professor Payal Nagpal has drawn our attention to the important features of writing vis-a-vis life and literature in the 19th century and before that. And at the end of the discussion, I would say that 19th century writing is a kind of model for that writing which engaged with life. But things must have changed before, after that, and there are other problems that occur in our own century, which could be the 20th or 21st century, and we can think of these things also in connection with the topic that we have today. So I conclude by saying that literature and life have that kind of dynamic connect, and that should be recognized. Thank you.